difficulty, the hardships of the arduous journey that the three wise men had undertaken from their hometown to the town of Bethlehem in order to see the infant baby Jesus. Further, after that, lines 21 and 22 and 23 told us about a rich plain of vegetation which was highly symbolic of life, hope and expectation, and plenty of good things that the Magi were now looking forward to. Lines 24 and 25 were full of biblical imagery. In those images, the poet had captured biblical and other prophetic utterances which had been as signs and signals for the three wise men to follow in order to get a confirmation for their faith. Now let's refresh our minds and take another look at the poem, The Journey of the Magi. The poem is written in free verse. In other words, there is no meter or rhyme anywhere in it. Journey of the Magi. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. And the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out and the lack of shelters. And the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet, below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water mill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky. And an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with wine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information, and so we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our palaces, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. In line 26, the tavern, the wine leaves and the lintel all come together to paint a rich 3-dimensional picture that the poet wishes to present to us. The tavern is immediately reminiscent of the story that Jesus told his disciples concerning a standard of behavior that he was expecting them to maintain at all times. This is better known as the parable of the Good Samaritan. In this story, what happens is that a man is going on a journey, and on that journey he finds that there is another traveler who has been waylaid by thieves. The robbers have robbed all of his possessions and beaten him badly, leaving him for dead on the highway. Well, he is spotted by this particular person, who then cleans his wounds and takes him to an inn, offers the innkeeper the money to pay for his stay there, and promises to return and take care of him further in the future. In this story, what Jesus was telling his disciples is, this is the pattern of behavior, the attitude that he expected from all of his disciples. If you would like to know this story in detail, you can find it in the notes. The vine symbolizes Christian life because Christ described himself as the true vine. He said to his disciples, I am the vine and you are the branches, signifying a very deep and thorough connection between the stem of a tree and its branches. In other words, if that connect is lost between the stem and the branches, then the life sap or the energy cannot flow through from the stem into the branches. So in effect, what Christ was saying is that if you want to remain in me, if you want to remain connected, then the only way is by being at one with the stem at all times. Now in this particular line, the vine is described as being over the lintel. The lintel is the main support beam in the structure of a house. It plays a very important role, not just in terms of support, but also protection, because it keeps the rays of the sun out, it keeps the rain and the hail and the snow out. So the lintel is playing a significant role in a house. When this line says that the vine is over the lintel, what it means is it's signifying the expectations that a believer in Christ can have of him. If a believer in Christ stays connected to him, to the true vine, then he can expect that that vine's support and protection will be upon his home and his family. These three images together, the tavern, the vine and the lintel, form a picture of what Christ's expectations are of his believers in terms of their attitudes and behaviors, and in turn it also forms a picture of the expectations that a believer in Christ can have of him for the protection of their homes and their households. The whole line is an excellent example of Eliot's use of the objective correlative in order to create a composite picture of his newfound faith. This is the reason that Eliot's symbolist method of using images is often compared to a wide-angle camera shot which captures everything within a single frame. Line 27 speaks of 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver. Now the 6 hands probably represent the 3 magi, and the fact that they are standing at an open door is very significant. An open door signifies a point in our lives, a point of decision. When we are standing before that door, we can either walk through it or we can withdraw and go back. The point at which a person is standing in front of the door is that point at which nothing has changed in his life. But once he walks through that door, or once he turns around and goes back, everything will change. Now this is a point which every human being faces in their lives. They can either go through or withdraw, and their lives will never be the same after that. For each of us, the decisions that we take are based upon considerations which are important to us. For example, if a person wants to relocate, and if to him family is very important, then he might choose a place to relocate to where there are a great number of his family members. Or say if a person is very career oriented, then they might go to a city which is a huge metropolis where they will find many job opportunities. So every person makes the decisions that they do based upon those considerations that are important to them. Now for the 3 magi, the most important consideration was the prophecies. Being astronomers, for them predictions were very important. And when they saw predictions coming true one after the other, this became to them an important consideration for whether or not they would walk through that door. The door represents faith. Are they going to believe or are they going to turn back and go to their old way of life? This is the question that they are confronted with at this point in the poem. The silver in this line is directly related to Judas. Judas was one of Jesus' disciples who is portrayed in the Gospels as being very money-minded. When the people who were after Jesus' life wanted one of his close associates to identify him for certain, Judas agreed that he would be the one for the price of 30 pieces of silver. Further, he told Jesus' adversaries that he would identify Christ by planting a kiss on his cheek. Betrayal masked as love. Now we scorn Judas when we hear this story and we think, how could one of Jesus' close disciples do this to him? But the truth of the matter is that every one of us is guilty of betrayal at such a close and fundamental level. Confrontation with the Christ has the effect of making us conscious of our own sinful past. And that was the first realization that came to the three magi as they stood before the door of decision. The Gospels of Matthew and John both talk about the same incident wherein 4 Roman soldiers who were preparing Christ for the crucifixion stripped him of his clothes. They divided the clothes between them, but Jesus was wearing one outer garment which was a woven seamless garment. Apparently, this was a very expensive garment, and so the 4 soldiers who were there dividing up his clothes wanted to have it, each one of them for themselves, and they decided the best way would be to cast lots or to throw a dice, and whoever would win would get his woven cloak. There are 2 aspects to this event mentioned in this line. The first is that again, this was another incident that was prophesied, this time by the prophet David 1,000 years before it actually happened. In Psalm 22 and verse 18, David had said, speaking in prophecy as if he were the Christ, "They divided my garments amongst them and cast lots for my clothing." The Magi apparently knew about it, and therefore when they hear about this incident, it comes to their mind again as something which is forcing them to confront or deal with the truth. The second aspect of it is how callous we human beings can be. Here was something of historic significance happening in front of the soldiers, and there were the soldiers being greedy. Each one of them, instead of being concerned with the immensity of the event that was happening, were more bothered about who would get that seamless garment for himself. The Magi had begun to think about their own betrayal, their own greed, their own indifference, perhaps not done with the same intensity or in the same way as the people mentioned in this line. Nevertheless, they were guilty. And we know that betrayal, greed, and indifference, sheer callousness are all part of the human experience. This little image in which Eliot has brought together the dice, the silver, and the door once more is a representation of his imagist method of writing poetry, the objective correlative, which he uses to create a picture that's building up an atmosphere. It's an atmosphere that is making the Magi conscious of their sin and forcing them to the moment of decision. It is also probably very likely to be reminiscent of Eliot's own journey of faith, that as he became more and more conscious of his sinful life which needed a redeemer, he was being brought to this moment of truth. Line 27 speaks of feet kicking at empty wineskins. Now, first of all, let's try to understand what a wineskin is. A wineskin typically was the skin of an animal like a goat that was taken, and it was used to store wine from the time that it was freshly pressed from grapes up to the time that it was ready for consumption. A wineskin typically will expand as the wine in it ferments and requires more space. But once it has stretched, it will not stretch a second time. And that's where we get the saying from that you cannot put new wine into old wineskins, because the old wineskin will not stretch a second time. So when the new wine ferments in it, the old wineskin will burst and all the precious contents of it will be spilled out onto the floor. Therefore, the empty wineskins represent outdated modes of thinking. The Magi are now ready to kick these outdated modes out of their life or remove them forever, because once they were relevant when they held the new wine of their old method of thinking, but now that a new way of thinking had come into place in their lives, that old mindset would not do. They had to rid themselves of the old mindset in order to make space or to accommodate the new way of life or the new style of thinking. Lines 28 and 29 tell us about the continuing journey of the Magi, and finally they do find the place and they arrive there, the Magi says, in the evening. In biblical language, evening is the first part of the day. It is the beginning of a new day. So the new beginning again signifies a new step, a new move, a fresh start in the lives of the Magi. In line 30, the Magi finally find the place, and not just find it, but they find it satisfactory. Now, many well-known critics have commented on the meaning and significance of the use of this word satisfactory by Eliot in this line. Critics have told us that these three kings were not just kings, but they were also probably priests. So being priests, they had studied the holy scriptures of their land, and they knew about a prophetic utterance from a prophet who in English is known as Zoroaster, but to many Indians in the Parsi community is known as Zarathustra. Now, Zarathustra's actual dates of his birth and his life are not known accurately, but many critics believe that he lived approximately 700 years before the Christ. It may be more. And Zarathustra in his writings had prophesied the birth of Christ. Not only that, but he had also accurately prophesied the town in which he would be born, which is Bethlehem. In addition to the prophetic knowledge which the Magi had, they were also astronomers, and they had done their own calculations on the basis of which they followed a star which led them to the actual place of Christ's birth. So in recollecting their arrival at the correct place at the right time, the Magus is saying that they found everything satisfactory, which simply means that all the conditions of the prophecy made by Zoroaster and all their own work and calculations based upon the stars had come together and were correct. It was accurate and it was true. Lines 31 and 32 tell us about the distancing in time, and we know from these lines that the Magus is reporting what happened a long time before. But he says he would do it all over again. And this is true of many difficult situations in our life which have a good culmination. Even though we have had to face many hardships, if the reward at the end of that hardships is something priceless, something valuable, then we feel we wouldn't mind going through those hardships all over again. And this is the sentiment which the Magus is expressing in these lines. In line 33, Eliot says, set down this, and then he reiterates, set down this, for emphasis, because this which he is going to speak about now is really the main idea of the poem. He is not sure at all whether they had come there to witness a birth or a death. In their minds, up to this point in time, birth and death were two very separate events, and they were not linked together at all. But from this moment on, there came a confusion in the minds of the Magi about birth and death. The Magi had arrived in Bethlehem. They had seen the little baby in the crib, but but they were not sure what they were supposed to receive from this event. It was a birth, obviously, because Jesus was born and they had gotten to see the little baby, but in many senses it was also a death. Firstly, there was the paradox that Christ had been born only to die in order to pay the price for the reconciliation of God and man. So in other words, he was born only to die. This put the shadow of the cross right there over the little baby in Bethlehem. If the prophets who came to visit him knew about all the prophecies that had been fulfilled in his birth, then at that same moment they also knew about the prophecies concerning his death. This put the Magi in a tremendous dilemma. What were they to do when they knew that half of what they knew had already come to pass? What would they do with the rest of the knowledge that they had? The Magi were ardent students of the stars. If all the calculations that they had made thus far had come to pass, then they knew that the rest of the calculations would also happen. So standing from that vantage point in history, they already knew what the rest of the story would be like. So had they come here for a birth or had they come here for a death? Even they hardly knew. In the mind of the Magus, up to this point in time, birth and death had been two separate events, but from this point in time onwards, they would be one conjoined event. The second death that the Magus began to think about was the death of their own life. If they were to appropriate the birth of this baby, then that would mean the death of everything which their life had represented up until that point in time. The lifestyle that he talked about, the magic, the astronomy, the palaces, the terraces, the girls, their silken clothes, their service to them, offering them food and drink, all of that would have to change. So the incarnation would mean the death of everything which had been the reality of their lives up to that event in their lives. Another further complication signifies the third death that the birth of Christ would mean. The people whom the three kings ruled over had now, they said, become alien or foreign to them. Those people who loved them, who looked up to them as priests and rulers, could now no longer understand the changes that had happened in their lives. So they were like foreigners to their rulers, and the rulers also felt like their people were as aliens to them. So this created a big divide, which was in a sense a death, because there was a huge wall of irrelevance between the two of them. This greatly saddened the Magi at one level, and it made them feel a certain sense of regret about whether they had done the right thing or not. It does seem strange that the Magi exhibit none of the sense of joy and excitement that one would expect that such a revelation would bring in their lives. And this is probably because they no longer feel comfortable with their own lives. They are totally out of their comfort zone, although that is where they had lived all of this time. It seems strange that they are unable to give up the old dispensation, and their feelings of being ill at ease are stronger than the revelation that came to them through their visit to Bethlehem. Transformed internally by their visit to Bethlehem and by confronting the Christ, they became forever externally misfits in the world which they knew. This sense of dissatisfaction leads quite naturally to the last line of the poem, its culmination in line 42, where the Magus says that he would be glad of another death. It also represents the theology which the poem is structured around, in which we understand that to live for Christ is to die daily. So there were many things, even though their lives were transformed, there were several things in their life which would need to be changed, and that change would happen only on a day-to-day basis. And that's what the poet sums this poem up with. The poem is entirely based on the motif of the journey, which satisfies but also alienates. The metaphor of the journey works at three levels in this poem. Firstly, it is the physical journey of the Magi as they set out in search of the infant Jesus. Secondly, it is their own spiritual quest for satisfaction based upon the prophecies of the prophets and the calculations made by the stars. Lastly, it's Eliot's own journey to faith which is described in this poem. The journey inevitably leads to alienation as a traveler moves from one place to the other. When he leaves one place, he must of necessity disengage himself from all that connected him to that place of origin. And when he arrives at the new place, he must again of necessity appropriate all that is associated with the new destination. Whether the journey be a physical one or a spiritual one, this truth holds. In order to travel, a traveler must leave his comfort zone, but having arrived, he may not feel comfortable in his new location. There are many adjustments and changes that a traveler needs to make. At the same time, there is definitely no going back, because with traveling, with new experience comes new revelation and new knowledge. And once we have that new knowledge, new revelation, we are stretched in our minds, in our spirits, and in our experience. So there is no way we can ever go back, because we cannot unstretch that which has already been stretched. The journey, therefore, hasn't ended. The journey of the Magi and of Eliot leads to yet another journey. It's a never-ending journey, a journey of learning, a journey of revelation, a journey of new knowledge. One journey just leads to another. Yet in the end, Eliot seems to say, along with the Magus, that he would do it all over again. If the value of something that you find at the end of the journey is precious, every human being wouldn't mind going through all the hardships and difficulties just in order to achieve that goal, that stretching of one's mind and one's spirit.